Elias stood on the porch of the ranch that had belonged to his family for 4 generations, the weight of the bank's final notice pressing heavy against his chest like a physical stone. The land was parched, the fences were sagging with age, and the silence of the valley seemed to mock his desperate struggle to keep the legacy alive. His only beacon of hope was Serafina, a magnificent mare with a coat like polished mahogany, and the last tangible gift from his late father. She wasn't just livestock. She was the heartbeat of the ranch, the prize he intended to use to breed a champion that might finally pull his family out of the suffocating debt. But hope had turned to terror weeks ago, when Serafina vanished into the depths of the forbidden Black Forest, on a place where local lore said the trees grew thick enough to swallow the sun and ancient secrets remained buried in the shadows. Elias had spent 3 sleepless nights searching the jagged terrain, calling her name until his voice was nothing but a raspy whisper against the cold mountain air. When she finally emerged, drifting out of the morning mist like a specter, Elias was overcome with relief, yet he immediately felt that something was fundamentally wrong. Serafina looked physically altered, her stride possessing a rhythmic, almost hypnotic grace she had never shown before. Within days, it became apparent that she was unexpectedly pregnant. A biological impossibility, given her isolation, yet her belly swelled with alarming speed. The local veterinarian had visited twice, scratching his head as he pored over blood work that made no sense. He spoke of elevated mineral levels and cellular structures that didn't align with any known equine biology. In the nearby village, the elders huddled in small groups, their voices low as they whispered about the Silver Ghost, a legendary, ethereal stallion said to haunt the high peaks and the deepest shadows of the forest. They claimed the mountain had finally claimed its due, and that what Serafina carried was not of this world. As the days bled into weeks, Serafina's mahogany coat began to take on a shimmering, metallic hue, catching the light in ways that defied the laws of physics. She grew distant and regal, refusing the expensive grain Elias struggled to buy, instead opting for the wild, bitter herbs that grew only at the very edge of the woods. Her eyes, the once a soft chocolate brown, took on a piercing golden clarity that seemed to see right through Elias's soul. Elias watched her with a mixture of awe and growing dread, realizing that the clock was ticking, not just for the bank's foreclosure, but for whatever mystery was growing inside his beloved mare. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The air grew thick and heavy on the night of the delivery as a massive electrical storm rolled over the mountains, tearing through the sky with jagged bolts of blue lightning. The power lines groaned and snapped under the wind, plunging the ranch into a suffocating, total darkness. Elias rushed to the barn, his hands trembling as he lit an old, flickering lantern. The smell of ozone and wet earth filled the space as he found Serafina in the corner of her stall, her breathing heavy and labored. She was in visible distress, her eyes glowing with an unnatural, pulsating intensity that illuminated the wooden walls. Elias realized with a jolt of panic that the foal was positioned strangely. He could feel a hard, ridge-like structure through her side that didn't feel like bone or muscle. He guided her through the labor, his own sweat mingling with the cold rain dripping from the leaky roof. When the foal finally began to emerge, Elias recoiled in shock. There were no typical birth fluids. Instead, the creature was encased in a thick, golden, translucent membrane that emitted a soft, rhythmic glow, casting long, dancing shadows across the barn. With shaking fingers, Elias reached out to wipe away the glowing film, his heart hammering against his ribs. As the membrane fell away, he collapsed to his knees, the lantern nearly slipping from his grasp. The creature lying in the straw was not a horse. It was a marvel of nature that defied every law of biology Elias had ever known. Along its spine, a row of iridescent, diamond-shaped scales shimmered like opals, and when it opened its eyes, they were deep, swirling pools of liquid sapphire. It didn't whinny. It let out a soft, melodic hum that vibrated in Elias's very bones. Just as he reached out to touch the creature's flank, the sound of heavy engines cut through the thunder. A fleet of black, high-tech vehicles was barreling down his remote dirt road, their headlights piercing the storm as they reached his gate. The roar of engines drowned out the storm as headlights from 3 black SUVs swept across the barn's siding. Elias felt a cold spike of adrenaline. The high-tech equipment visible through the tinted glass told him these were no ordinary trespassers. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the lead vehicle with surgical precision. He was a man who looked out of place in the wilderness, yet he carried the aura of someone who owned everything he surveyed. Elias acted quickly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. With desperate strength, he guided the shimmering foal toward the back of the barn. Beneath a pile of loose hay lay a secret storm cellar his grandfather had built decades ago. It was cramped, damp, and smelled of ancient and cool earth, but it was the only sanctuary he had. He lowered the creature into the darkness just as the heavy barn doors were kicked open with a thunderous crash. Thorne didn't bother with pleasantries. He held a handheld device that hummed with a soft blue light, its digital screen displaying fluctuating thermal signatures. His men began sweeping the stalls with methodical, chilling efficiency. Serafina let out a protective scream, her metallic coat rippling under their flashlights like liquid mercury. "We know it's here, Elias," Thorne said, his voice as cold as the mountain rain. "The energy spike we tracked was unmistakable. You are harboring a biological anomaly that belongs to the world." Elias stood his ground, praying the foal would remain silent in the dark pit. For 20 agonizing minutes, the scanners swept the walls. But the lead lining of the old cellar miraculously masked the foal's presence. Frustrated, Thorne finally retreated, leaving a final warning. He would return shortly with full legal authority to seize the biological asset immediately. Once the engines faded, Elias pulled the creature from the cellar. Within 48 hours, the growth was impossible to ignore. The creature had doubled in size, its legs growing sturdy and its iridescent scales hardening into a protective armor. It didn't behave like a common animal. It watched Elias with hyper-intelligence, mimicking his movements and following him with an empathetic gaze that seemed to read his very soul. The bond was sealed when Elias accidentally sliced his palm on a rusted gate. The foal approached and gently licked the deep wound. A surge of warmth raced up Elias's arm, and before his eyes, the skin knit itself back together, leaving not even a faint scar. This wasn't just an animal. It was a sacred miracle. The following morning, Thorne returned with a leather briefcase. $10 million, he stated, laying documents on the hood of his car. The bank will be gone, and your family's land will be secure for 10 generations of your family. Just give us the foal. Elias looked at the papers, then back at the barn. The temptation was a physical weight, a chance to fulfill every promise he made to his father. But as he looked into the sapphire eyes of the foal, he saw a sentient being, not a corporate product. He refused, but the choice was soon stolen. A disgruntled ranch hand, seeking a reward, had snapped a photo of the creature through a window and sent it to Thorne. The peace was shattered an hour later as a convoy of armored vehicles swarmed the property. Thorne returned with armed security and a legal injunction. Elias barricaded himself inside the barn, bolting the heavy doors. He expected the foal to cower, but the creature stepped protectively in front of Serafina, its sapphire eyes glowing with a fierce, pulsating light. As the corporate team used a hydraulic ram to breach the entrance, the foal didn't whinny. It emitted a low-frequency hum that vibrated the very walls, making the air shimmer with energy. As the doors were about to be breached, the foal let out a harmonic frequency so intense that it caused all the electronic devices of the intruders to explode in a shower of blinding sparks and smoke. The smoke from the fried circuits hung in the air like a thick gray fog, smelling of copper and ozone. Marcus Thorne stood paralyzed for a moment, staring at his useless handheld scanner, his face twitching with fury. The electronic silence was more deafening than the storm had been. "Get it!" he screamed. "I do not care about the tech! Use the nets! Use your hands!" His security team, now forced into raw brutality, lunged forward. They were silhouettes of greed against the flickering lantern light, their heavy boots crushing the hay as they swarmed toward the back of the barn. Elias stepped forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had no weapon other than his father's old lariat, the rope rough against his calloused palms. "This ends now, Thorne!" Elias roared, his voice booming with a strength he did not know he possessed. He was not just protecting an animal, while he was defending the very soul of this land. He stood unyielding, even as the first god raised a heavy baton to strike him down. Behind him, the air began to vibrate with a frequency that made the teeth ache. The foal did not retreat. Instead, it stepped into the center of the stall, its sapphire eyes widening until they were twin galaxies of liquid light. The iridescent scales along its spine began to radiate a white glow so intense it bleached the color from the wooden walls. The foal's form started to flicker, dancing between the tangible world and an ethereal plane. As Thorne made a final lunge for the creature's neck, Seraphina let out a piercing whinny. She broke her restraints forcefully, and the foal released a pulse of pure energy. The wave was silent, but absolute. It acted as a physical wall of light, while lifting Thorne and his men off their feet and pinning them against the barn's exterior. They hung there, suspended in midair, their eyes wide with terror, as they realized they were facing a power that did not belong to the laws of ordinary man. In the sudden stillness that followed, the back wall of the barn seemed to dissolve into mist. Standing at the edge of the black forest was the Silver Ghost. The legendary stallion was a colossus of starlight, his mane flowing like mercury. He did not make a sound, yet his presence commanded the very earth to hold its breath. The foal turned away from the light, looking at Elias one last time. There was a profound intelligence in those sapphire eyes, a wordless promise of friendship that transcended the boundaries of species. It stepped forward and touched its warm muzzle to the hand of Elias. It was a sensation like a spark of electricity before the creature trotted toward its father. As the foal reached the tree line, it paused and struck the ground with its front hoof. The earth groaned and buckled, and a jagged vein of pure gold erupted from the soil, snaking across the ranch yard in a dazzling display of wealth. It was the ultimate redemption, a gift that would secure the ranch's future and erase the bank's debts forever. When the light finally faded and the Silver Ghost vanished into the trees with his son, Thorne and his men were left broken and trembling in the mud. Thorne was disgraced, his reputation ruined by the inexplicable failure. Elias remained, the sole guardian of a miracle. Weeks later, he sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the peaks. Seraphina was calm, grazing on the lush grass that now grew over the vein. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the scale left in the hay. As his thumb brushed its surface, the world around him blurred into a vision of a vast celestial realm, a place of skies and peace. He smiled, knowing his foal was now the king of the forest, and that miraculous birth was just the beginning of a new era.